Hello, everybody. All right. Hello. It is almost 7 o'clock. I'm going to give it just another minute or two before we get started to update you on what's happening with the Gilgo Beach murders and I don't know if you've seen the news about the Baltimore um, murderer, allegedly. And so we'll talk about those, and then we'll talk a little bit about why is an estate planning lawyer talking about crimes? I mean, what does she know about crimes? I mean, seriously, she does estate planning, so why is she talking about crimes? So we'll get started here in just a minute and let 7 o'clock kind of roll around. So to get started, let me just introduce myself to you. I'm Tanya Hendricks. I'm an attorney based out of Huntsville, Alabama, and I currently do estate planning work. But we'll get to a little bit later. But I have a much uh, um, wider area of legal practice and experience than just estate planning. But again, I'm Tanya Hendricks, and I want to jump right in and talk about the Gilgo Beach murders. So the defendant was in court this week. I'm just going to try not to use his name because I don't want his name spoken very much. I want to stay focused on the women who he allegedly murdered. And those women are the ones he's been charged with: Melissa, Megan, and Amber. They're now really trying to see if he is linked to Maureen's death, and there are several others. So if you recall from Tuesday night, I spoke about the Gilgo Beach murders, and there were 11 bodies found. So far, this particular person's only been charged with 3 of those, but certainly there may be more. And he also has been investigated for some um, crimes down in South Carolina where he has some property as well. So there may be some things that come out of there. But right now, he's just charged with 3 crimes in New York. And lucky for him, is in New York because there is no death penalty right now, as far as I can tell. And so he is not, as far as I can tell, he won't be facing the death penalty for these women's deaths, but he will be facing a long time in prison. So if you'll recall, on Tuesday night, I mentioned he would be coming in to court, or he had a court case, and that he had some hearings scheduled for this week, and that the national pundits were saying, "Oh, he's not going to be in court. These are just minor things." And I told you Tuesday night, I said, no, these are serious offenses. He has a right to be in court, and he will be in court. Well, what do you know? I was right. He was in court. He was there with his lawyers, just as he should have been, because these are very serious offenses. And when you are charged with a serious offense like this, even though it's not a death case, as far as when I say death case, I mean like death penalty case. So it's even though it's not a death penalty case, he can still he still has a right to be in court because it's still a very serious offense. So some things we learned about today is he is well, I say he, the law enforcement, they are looking at him for the other crimes to see if he is linked to those other deaths. They got into some of the evidence as far as the DNA. So his attorney is saying the DNA that was picked up from the pizza box. If you'll recall, he kind of got pinpointed through the final straw, I guess, was the pinpointing of his DNA through a pizza that he threw away. So his attorney is saying, well, there's a difference in the mitochondrial DNA that they use that method, and then the regular DNA that's normally used. So there will be some fights down the road as to which DNA, which is better. Is the mitochondrial DNA analysis, is that going to be sufficient to tie him to the murders? Of course, the defense attorney is saying he didn't do it. He's innocent. He's wonderful. He's just an outstanding citizen in the community who was just trying to work and take care of his family and do all these things. He is a productive member of society. So that is what he has to say. I don't know if this guy really believes that, he has to say those things. His client has to have confidence in him, so he has to say those things and defend his client. So, before anyone wants to talk badly about the defense attorney, then just understand he has a job to do, and he has got to do his job to the best of his ability. So if this guy gets convicted, that conviction does not get overturned. So I've been a prosecutor and defense attorney. I know stones get thrown and arrows are pointed at defense attorneys all the time. How could you do this? How could you defend that person? Well, they have a constitutional right to a defense and a competent defense. And so this attorney and every defense attorney is doing their best to help their client. And in doing so, it may help prevent a conviction from getting overturned in the future. So don't throw arrows at the criminal defense lawyer. He's doing his job. And until I see where he has crossed the line, where he's personally vouching for this person, that's kind of where you cross the line as a defense attorney. Attorneys should not take cases personally. We have to stay professional. So anyway, I'm digressing, going down a different road I plan on going down, but I just want to say this defense attorney is doing what he's got to do for his client, and he has a job to do as a constitutional right to have a competent defense attorney, and that's what this defense attorney is doing. But to bring it back, so they will have some more hearings. There'll be some more fights down the road as to the DNA. That's to be expected. As I said, Tuesday night, they will be in court multiple times before this case ever goes to trial. It's just that there's just too much. So one of the things that came out of the hearing today was that the judge asked the defendant if he has had a chance to review the evidence. So apparently, the prosecution has turned over a whopping, I mean, I'm saying I've done defense work. When you have this many pages, it's a lot. So they have turned over 8,000 pages of documents as evidence. 8,000, that's a lot. I remember having cases as a criminal defense attorney where I might have 4 pages of evidence. If I was lucky, I had 4 pages of evidence. So they have turned over 8,000 pages of evidence, 5,000 of which is just from 2 of the victims. And remember, we got 3 victims that he's already been charged with. And so 5,000 of those pages relate to just 2 of the victims. So that's a lot. But the judge asked him if he has had a chance to start going over the evidence, and that's crucial. It may sound like a silly question to ask, but when you have someone who is charged with this serious of an offense, the judge has to make sure this person is able to review the evidence, because if this guy gets convicted and down the road he says, I couldn't participate in my defense, I couldn't review the evidence, I couldn't do these things, I wasn't involved, the judge can go back and say, hey, wait a minute. On September 27th in court, you said you've had a chance to review these documents and that you're spending, and he said in the court, told the judge he's spending a couple hours a day going through these things. Guys, he's in jail. What else does he have to do other than pour over his evidence? And so he's got the time to do that. And he said to the judge that he is doing those things. So that's good for the case overall that he's reviewing it. I feel bad for his defense attorneys because I'm sure that he's probably bombarding the defense attorneys with a lot of questions. Hey, here's this. What about this? Which can be good. I've had clients that were very good about pointing things out. I've had some clients that weren't so good at it. They were just they were relying on some jailhouse lawyers. So there are some things that are positive and negative about him seeing that evidence. But he's got nothing else to do. He's sitting in jail. So he's got all the time in the world to start pouring through those things. Okay, so that is the update on the Gilgo Beach murders. Again, we're talking about his victims that he's charged with. Maureen, I'm sorry, she is not charged with Maureen. He is charged with Melissa, Megan, and Amber. So just keep those names in mind because those women are the ones that we need to think about their families and be glad that there's going to hopefully be some closure to their murders. So I won't say justice. We have a system of laws. I don't call it a justice system. I call it a legal system. But there'll be some sense of closure and hopefully some accountability for their deaths in the future. So moving on to Baltimore, if you have not followed this, there is a recent rape and murder out of Baltimore. It's really quite disturbing. She was 26 years old. Her name was or is Pava Lapierre, and she was a rising star in Baltimore in the tech industry. And in fact, I was watching a news conference today with the Baltimore mayor, and he mentioned that he knew her personally, and that he was just shocked and saddened by her death. So the person who has been arrested for that, I don't even think I wrote down his name because I don't even care. So the person who has been arrested for that has been out of prison since October 2022. Right now, they don't know of any connection between him and Miss Lapierre. They don't know, or they're not releasing it. But according to the news conference I watched, they don't know of any type of connection. But he was released from prison in October 2022. And what was he serving time in prison for? Pretty much the same thing. Not murder, but he did rape someone. He they didn't call it kidnapping, but he detained someone against her will. And he played the Good Samaritan, saw a girl breaking up with a boyfriend being mean. He offered to help her out. And he ended up taking her back to his apartment and raping her. She was able to get away. So that was not a murder, but he was sentenced to, in 2013, he was sentenced to 30 years to serve in the state penitentiary. And it was what we call it kind of I guess it was a split sentence because it was 16 years of that was suspended. And he would have been on probation for 5 years after he was released. So if you look at if he was sentenced in 2013 to 30 years, but he was 16 of that was suspended, you look at the back end. And so it's 16 off that back end. And he shouldn't have been released until about 2027. But he got released in October 2022. Maybe because of good time, but I don't know how New York handles those things. But a lot of prisons will do good time that will allow someone to get out of prison early if they behave themselves, if they take classes, if they do certain things that make it look like they are trying to better themselves. Then a lot of prisons will say, "You're doing good. Let me give you a check mark and let's get you out of here early." And it kind of sounds like that's what maybe happened here. I know that in the press conference, the mayor was quite upset. The police officers, everybody was very upset over the fact this guy was out of prison. He should not have been out of prison yet. And so they are placing the blame squarely on the shoulders of the people who run the prison system there that to let him out. But even before this young lady was murdered in her apartment building, which had a coded entrance, and they haven't revealed how he got into her apartment building. They haven't revealed any of that information. I'm sure they know. I'm sure there's some video cameras. I'm sure there's something that they know, but they're not releasing it yet. And I'm sure it'll come out soon, but that I have not seen that yet. But even before this happened to Miss Lapierre, on September 19th of 2023, he worked at like a apartment complex. He worked in an apartment building, and he gained access to a couple's home. And according to the press conference, he knew this couple, and so this was a targeted attack. So that there's a reason I mentioned that. It was a targeted attack where he targeted this one particular couple and bound them up, raped her, and he set the place on fire. And there's actually a 5-year-old child in the apartment as well, kind of upstairs. The 5-year-old was okay, other than some smoke inhalation. The adults have survived, but one of them is in critical condition. The other one has been released from the hospital, apparently. But it's a pretty horrific set of facts, whether or not he knew them, which the police say that he did and it was targeted. But the police say, because the reporters did a great job, they were like, why did you not let people know that this guy was doing these things, that this guy did this type of offense, this type of crime? And the police officer was like, well, it was targeted. We didn't think it was a danger to the broader community. Obviously, 2020 is hindsight's 2020. If we had known that's what he was going to do, or if we didn't think this was a targeted attack, we would have let the public know. But they didn't let the public know. And so there was not any, the public did not know this guy was out there dangerous doing these things. So they actually had an arrest warrant issued for him prior to him committing this murder and rape against Miss Lapierre. Um, so they just had not been able to get a hold of him yet, which is just truly unfortunate for Miss Lapierre, for her family, that he was able to continue to walk the streets of Baltimore after committing a horrendous offense on September 19th, prior to murdering Miss Lapierre just a few days ago. So he has now been arrested for her murder. Um, I know the authorities are very happy to have him behind bars, and they are hopeful that this will get his probation or parole from prison revoked at a very minimum, just to be able to assure that he is going to stay off the streets. But this begs the question, why are these criminals getting out of prison? Why are people getting, like he was convicted already in 2012, 2013 of that rape, which he was serving time on. Why did he only get 30 years? Why was it suspended 16 years? Why was he getting out? I don't know the set of facts as to why this particular person is getting out of prison. I can tell you from my experience as a prosecutor, as a criminal defense lawyer, and having worked with victims for over 20, gosh, way more than 20 years. I've worked with victims of sexual assault and rape. There are various factors. So when you look at on the front end of things during a prosecution, especially when it's a sex crime, it is very difficult for victims. Some victims, it may be therapeutic to talk about it and be able to point in the courtroom at their accuser. For other victims, and probably the majority that I've worked with, it was frightening. It was something they did not want to do. I mean, consider, if you will, you're having to tell a group of strangers, which a jury is a group of strangers. So consider you're sitting in a stale room with 12 strangers' eyes looking at you, watching your body language, listening to what you have to say. You got a man in a black robe sitting next to you. You got somebody taking down everything that you're saying. And you may have people out in the gallery that's watching. And then you have the person who did this horrendous offense to you sitting there 10 feet, 20 feet from you, staring you down. That is hard. That is a difficult position for someone to be in and to talk about what happened. A rape is very intimate. And when I say intimate, it's in the worst kind of way here, but I mean, you're talking about some things that we generally don't talk about in public, even when it's not a rape. And so to talk about the violation in a public manner, in public courtroom like that, is just so incredibly hard for victims. And I used to prosecute child sex cases. It is exponentially harder for children because for many of them, that's their first sexual experience. So imagine you're telling somebody, do you want to tell a bunch of strangers about your first sexual experience? Likely not. And in fact, when I prosecute and I ask that question while striking a jury, I would say, how many of you want to tell me about your first sexual experience? You know how many times people raise their hands? Zero. They don't want to do that. But that's what we're requiring of victims in court. And as a defense attorney, I get that. I understand that you have a defendant that has a right to um, um, I forgot the word here. They had a right. They have a right to confront their accuser. So they have that right, the constitutional right to confront their accuser, who is saying these bad things about them, so that they can cross-examine them, try to see if they're telling the truth, try to poke holes in the story. And really, it comes down to, so in a criminal case, the standard is beyond a reasonable doubt. So as a defense attorney, you're trying to decide if and you're trying to get the jury to find reasonable doubt in a case. So when there is a sex crime in particular, sometimes attorneys, at the request of the victim, will offer reduced sentences, will offer, make a plea offer that is not the maximum, maybe not the minimum, but somewhere in between, probably on the lower end, in order to get that person to plead guilty and spare that victim the the trauma of actually going to trial and then reliving those things. Because when they're having to testify, they have to go through all the details again. And so they're reliving it again. And a lot of times these trials are happening a year to 2 years after the rape actually happens. And when they have finally started healing and moving on, they got to come back into court and go back through all the details of the case. So a lot of victims will ask and get the prosecution to just plead it down a little bit so they don't have to testify. Some of them won't. Some are like, I want my day in court. I want to confront this person. I want to tell everybody what he did to me. It just kind of depends on your victim. But when you see some of these lower sentences for these horrendous crimes, that could be it. Could be an issue with evidence. There may be some issues with, can we prove the case? So on the prosecution side, they have the burden of proof, and maybe they have some doubts. Maybe there's some issues with the evidence and they can't get certain evidence in. They know they can't. So at that point, they may go, well, let's just plead this down. So once the person is into prison, though, they'll get credit for the time they served in jail. They'll get credit for, in a lot of states, we do good time. So if someone is on their best behavior, they have what's called a jacket, a little folder that kind of keeps their personal information in. So they can take classes, they can take drug and alcohol courses, they can take anger management courses, they can take all these different things that will help make them be a better person, and it helps them get out earlier. So when the board of pardons and paroles or whoever is reviewing it and deciding, should this person get paroled early, then if they've had a good history in jail, haven't gotten in a lot of trouble, they've been someone that could become a trustee in the jail, which a trustee is just someone that is allowed to walk around and clean up or do whatever. Um, if they have been on their best behavior while in prison, they could get released early. And sometimes people are released a little earlier because there's prison overcrowding. How do you solve that problem? There are a lot of people with higher pay grades than me are trying to figure that out. But there are issues with our prisons being overcrowded. Now, should these violent offenders be the ones to let out versus some of the lower level drug offenses? Who knows? We don't have a crystal ball as to who will actually commit offenses once they're let out. There have been situations where someone who was at a lower level drug offense got out of prison early and then killed somebody. I think there was a police officer recently that's what happened. And so you never know what they're going to do. And we don't have a crystal ball, but we've got to figure out some way to keep these violent offenders off the streets. And I mean, I don't know that the answer is to build more prisons. I don't know. Don't know what that answer is. But that's kind of how people like him may get out of prison and have the opportunity to commit these offenses again. And a lot of crimes like this are crimes of opportunity. They just see the opportunity and they take it. All right. So why the heck is an estate planning lawyer talking about crime? So my name, I told you before, I'm Tanya Hendricks. I'm an estate planning lawyer in Huntsville. But before I did estate planning work, I've been an attorney for over 20, well, right at 22 years. I have been a prosecutor. I've been a criminal defense lawyer. I've done divorce work. I've done custody work. I've done just a little bit of everything within the legal practice. So, and when I did the defense work, I did a lot of indigent defense. So I was in trial all the time. I probably have more than 75 jury trials under my belt. So I've had a lot of these different experiences with trials, and that's jury trials. And so um, I have a lot of experience with that. But I also have had a lot of experience working with sexual assault victims, rape victims, and sex trafficking victims. I've been an advocate for them since my college days, and so I have worked alongside a lot of them, and certainly know kind of some of the things that they go through, think about, have to worry over. And even just as a woman, I understand some of the worries behind just going out at night. I mean, like Miss Lapeer was home. and she was attacked by a stranger. Now, most rape victims are attacked by someone they know, but for many of us, many of us women, our concern is the stranger that's lurking behind a bush or in that white van in the parking lot. But for most victims, their attacker is someone they know. But I have worked with victims for so long, and I've seen and heard their cry to be seen and to be recognized and not to have the shame and the stigma that's attached to being a rape victim. And so that's why when I talk about these cases, I really want to stress the victims. I want to stress that they are worthy of the dignity and humanity that each one of us has. So, regardless of their circumstance, so like with the Gilgo Beach, they were sex workers. Miss Lapierre was an outstanding person in her community who somehow this person crossed paths with her, and she didn't deserve it. No one deserves that stuff. I hate it. I hate it when people say, "Well, they didn't deserve that." Nobody deserves it. But she was not in a dangerous situation. She was home. The victims in the Gilgo Beach, just because they were out as sex workers doesn't mean they deserved it any more than Miss Lapierre did. So I don't care. I've heard so many times if someone was raped, what was she wearing? Why was she wearing that? Why was she out there at whatever time of the day or night? That doesn't matter. Just doesn't. Don't rape. Don't rape. Don't rape. Don't kill. It's that simple. But I have literally walked the streets of across the United States looking for trafficking victims. I have lived for 6 months in a safe house for sex trafficking victims, and I've heard some stories that people should never go through those things. I mean, the depth of depravity of humanity is just never ending. You would be shocked at some of the things that people do, and I have walked those roads with those women. I have literally walked the streets looking for victims. I have gone to places and kind of extracted them from those locations and gotten them to a safe place. So when I talk about these victims and what they go through, I have never been through that personally, but I have walked the roads with them and I've seen where they come from. I've seen what they go through and how difficult it is to overcome some of these things. And regardless of their background, whether they're an up and coming tech um, entrepreneur and starlet, as Miss Lapierre was, or whether they're a sex worker in Manhattan, they should be treated with the same respect and the same dignity and the same humanity. So I'm going to end this with just a reminder of the names of Maureen, Melissa, Megan, and Amber. Y'all have a great night. If you want to continue to get updates from me, just like and subscribe. It's just easy, like and subscribe. And I will see you on the next night, Tuesday at 7. Bye.